Hello, this video is the history of England. England is a cool country. It's my favorite country of Europe and has the most interesting history of the world. England is the one country that if you wanted to study one country just to know the developments of a country, like how your typical country would develop, England has the coolest history, the most interesting history, because it has the most amount of really good leaders. It also has some crazy bad leaders. It has a really good mix of lots of different kinds of people. It has the best, most intricate history because of had a really oral culture, I think, as well as civilization. Because England also, it's the only country in Europe that can trace its ancestry through Rome. Like, it's a child of Rome. It was in the Roman Empire, just like all those other Roman countries. But it was also a direct descendant of all of the barbarian tribes, all of the Germanic tribes, just like Germany. So it's like the unifier of both of those. And even if you look at the language of English, half the words in English are from German. The simple words, the everyday words that people use. And then the other half are from Latin, like the more complex words. Because England, England was a Roman country, Roman province, so they used the words there. And then and then some more barbarians came in, I think, when Rome left in 400 and 410. And then lots more came in back in 800 after 790. And so it became like a Germanic language. And then it became French again, or Latin again, when all the French invaded. So, yeah. But also in customs and all that other stuff, it's like half and half, so it's pretty cool. And it's the country where America comes from. American civilization is most similar to England. So let's talk about the history of England. Back in the good old days, England was, back in the Neolithic days, England has lots of neoliths, like megaliths, like Stonehenge. And then there's another one that it's like a line of stones that go perfectly straight across England, and even crisscross, all the way across. Nobody knows how they got there. And dolmens, like big rocks placed and stuff. And some archaeologists, due to findings of ancient settlements and analyzing those settlements with things that archaeologists do, some of them think that there was almost as big of a population in England in Neolithic times, like 2,000 years before Jesus, 4,000 years ago, as in 1914, at the end of the Second Industrial Revolution. And England was increasing in population, since Jesus all the way up until the Industrial Revolution, and a lot in the last couple hundred years. So the population went down. So what was civilization like in England before that? I mean, it must have been like banging metropolis. Like, what kind of civilization? England was a lot more. I'm gonna plug my video camera up because the battery's about to die. England was really. It was warmer than it is now. Back in those Neolithic days, couple thousand years before Jesus of Nazareth. So they could grow more, and also it's like, who made those megaliths? Stonehenge is huge. Megalithic people could make megaliths, so maybe there was, when you had the world civilization back 10,000 years ago, so, modern archaeologists think megaliths was made 3,000 BC and stuff, but maybe they were older than that, or maybe it was like more advanced civilizations living around at that time. Back in the days of Atlantis, maybe it wasn't just Atlantis and the Bahamas that was civilized with plains and all that, but that civilization was all over, and they just didn't record it. Who was living in England, and those are the people who made the megaliths. Megaliths also exist in Italy, Corsica, France, Spain, all over Europe, and they're all dated to like the same time. So there was this like megalithic age, and and a lot of the megaliths up in Greece, the Greeks said that it was the gods who made them, and like the Cyclops supposedly helped make Mycenae and stuff. So I mean that makes sense if you think if the gods were giants and the Cyclops were giants and those are giant stones. Well, maybe there was another race living here then. So, anyways. But then, I think it was like the Britons. I think they're like Celts, speaking Celtic language, who live there. And when the Romans came, they saw lots of civilizations there, lots of people living and stuff, and they had towns and everything. They had like grass thatch houses and villages and kingdoms, with just a whole bunch of kingdoms, and it was like civilization. But they were prime territory to live in because England is actually farther north than France. It's way up there in northern England, in northern Europe, but it's warmer than anywhere else there because it's right way out there in the ocean. And the Gulf Stream, the winds from the equator go all the way up the ocean and just hit England. So it rains all the time in England, and it rains warm rain. So great place to grow stuff. Warmer, and it's also an island, so it has really a lot of good coastline for people, and it's easy to create borderlines for people. So it was a cushy place to be. Everybody wanted to go there. So I guess maybe they fought over it, but smart people went there. I mean, Japan's kind of the same way. Japan is a great country with great people, and they're an island too, so, and about the same latitude, so. England was also, it was desirable place because there was lots of gold and silver there and pearls. And so it caught the Romans' attention, and the Romans Julius Caesar tried to take over England twice. He tried to go across the straits twice, but the wind blew him back both times, so he went back to Italy. And then 100 years later or something, 80 years later or whatever, Claudius had a general go up there and take over England. They sailed across the straits with like 40,000 troops and went across, and all the English people, the little tribes, were like, whoa, my God, who are these guys? Holy shit. And they're like, we are the Romans. We are going to colonize you. You can be, you want to come and be a part of us? So they would woo like tribe after tribe, one at a time. Bring their leaders, their kings, back to Rome and be like, look at Rome. Isn't this cool? Don't you want this? Guy'd come back and be like, all right, we're going to be a vassal kingdom to England. The tribe leader got to be like the governor or, like co-governor or whatever of the New English area. And they'd help him make architecture, make the big bathhouses and palaces, and utilizing Roman architecture and their knowledge of the cement and all that stuff that they used, and then they would attack all the other tribes around them. Kind of like take advantage of battles. You know how like in America the French and English they'd get Indian tribes to turn against each other, like these tribes and like this tribe, so they'd have a war with them, and so they did that with England. Ended up taking all over England. And then, and Claudius went there for a couple of weeks after his general took it over. And then in 60 AD, there was a rebellion, though, a big rebellion. There was this tribe called the Iceni that was up in like 100 miles or something northeast of London on the coast. That the king died, and he left his kingdom. Half of the kingdom was to go to be like, half of the power was to go to his widow, and the other half was to go to like the governor general or whatever. And I guess the governor general was like, no way, I'm going to take over the whole thing, you know. And she's like, what? No, or whatever. And so they flogged her, which is when you whip somebody with pieces of like hooks on the end. So when you take it off, it'll like go into your skin and then pull skin out. And like they even had it scientifically figured, like if you get flogged like 23 times, you're dead. You bleed to death. And I don't know how many times she got flogged. Maybe it was like 8 or something. And then they raped her like 10-year-old, 13-year-old daughters right in front of her. And they're like, see, don't fuck with Rome. So she got all pissed off, the queen, and her name was Boudica. And she united with a bunch of other tribes, and they attacked a Roman city, and like the people held up in the temple, you know, the temple of Jupiter or Hera or whoever, and they burned the temple down, killed everybody, and then the Romans sent a legion after him to get him, and but they ambushed the legion in the forest and killed the legion. So then they got together like another legion or whatever, but by then like they were picking up steam, and they were like they had a huge army. I don't know how many it was, but it was like thousands, and so they were like way outnumbered the Romans that were there. So the Romans like, holy shit, we have to fight them. And they heard that they were coming. The Romans like gathered their troops up, I guess, and came down the Wadlingham Road, because they had built a road by them that went all the way up the middle of England to like pretty far north, pretty far, like almost up to Scotland. And so they went their troops down the road, and they kind of lured that group of Boudica down into this like valley, and the Rome was like had their backs up against this thick forest, so it would be harder for the tribespeople to get them from the back, or they wouldn't think about it or whatever, because they had such a big army. They thought they could just trounce the Romans. So they went after Rome, and they were so confident that they were going to kick the Romans' asses that they all brought all their carriages and stuff and their whole families to watch their army kill them. So their whole carriages were like this big like wall of carriages on the other side of the valley. And then all their warriors charged at the Romans, and the Romans had they had a different fighting style, and it was Romans. That's how the Romans were able to kill all of the French too, is that they would get the snipe off the French tribes one by one with the help of other tribes that they didn't like. But the fighting style was better because the Roman soldiers, they would all like bunch together. You've seen it in all the movies. They bunch together with their big swords, like they're a big like battle, or a big like turtle, you know, shells. So you could throw your spears at them and rocks at them, and it would just go off there'd be no place to go in and kill somebody. And then you'd run up on them. It's kind of like cops, you know how cops lock their shields together. So people would charge at them, and those guys would like fight naked, like butt naked, and they'd paint themselves blue and work themselves up into a frenzy and run at you with an axe. And like one at a time, like a big mob. And so they came after him, and the Romans actually also had a formation where it wasn't just a wall of them, it was like jagged. So the people would run into the X on the formation like this, but then they couldn't like jump over or get through the shield. So then the guys would like stick their swords through the shield and poke you and like injure you, like mortally injure you, and then like close up the shield again. So people would run in, and then they'd run in, and they're kind of useless, you know. It's kind of like that movie 300. They put themselves in a really narrow area, and so even if you've got like 100 million people outnumbering just 20 guys, it doesn't matter, because the dude behind the other guy can't do anything. You know, it's only you against the dude in front of you, and if the dude in front of you doesn't have a shield and you do, you know, who's gonna win? So they'd poke him, and then the other dudes in front would run up, and it turned into this like situation where they got squunched, you know, like in like concerts and stuff where there's trampling and people get crushed to death, and there's nothing anybody can do about it, and people get trampled. It kind of happened like that. So people got trampled, they trampled themselves, and so they got so squished they couldn't even move their arms. And so they were kind of useless fighters. So they were just getting hacked apart and fall down and die. And then the Romans would step over those bodies and move forward and squeeze them together because they had that V formation. So they would just squeeze them all in and hack them, step over them, and move forward. And then they kind of ran back to relieve the pressure of all the people. And then those guys, they just lost heart because they saw so many dead dudes. So they ran, and they ran back towards the carriages, and they couldn't get through the carriages to get room because by then the soldiers had moved in. So they were pinned against their carriages. So I think they said that they killed like 80,000 people or something. Obviously that's an exaggeration, but in Rome only lost like 400. It was like crazy. It was like 40-1. It was a slaughter, and they never found Boudica. I think legend has it that she killed herself. So, anyways, they described her as having red hair. So I guess maybe like the Irish. I guess that race, those Celts had red hair, and she was really tall and had like fiery look in her eyes. So, and apparently she fought with her top off because there's a statue of her with her carriage somewhere in England, and she's got a freaking tits out in the carriage. So, but I think in those cultures the women did fight. It was different than in Roman culture. Women didn't fight; they were like for the home and stuff. But the women were more like played a part in society in those Celtic and Germanic cultures. Ever since then, Britain was unified. But they never took over Scotland. I think Scotland was just too cold for the Romans. The Romans were from way down Mediterranean, and I don't think it's so arable up there, really rocky up there. So they just built Hadrian, who came after Claudius, I think. Built the Hadrian's Wall back in like 65 AD or something like that. That went all the way across England, coast to coast, 75 miles. And it's right near, it's actually just south, like 15 miles south or something, of the current border between Scotland. So that wall always served as a border between Scotland and England. And walls, the Chinese made their wall too, the Great Wall of China. And walls have serve a great purpose because it makes it clear like where the border is. So it makes it so that obviously it protected Rome from the northerly tribes. They'd come down and then they'd know not to pass. Like that's where Rome started, and they couldn't breach it because it was like 20 feet high. I saw Hadrian's Wall back in 97, and it was about 6 feet high, but it was still intact. Like it was still constant throughout the entire country. And even the foundations of the mile markers, every mile they had like a little village, and posts and stuff were still there. So I think people took it out, took it down so they could like step over it, after that when England was a country. But they never took it completely apart because it was their heritage. But it serves, those walls, they serve a great purpose because, well, number one, the barbarians can't cross it because it's so big. But also so they just don't think about crossing it. And border areas are also dangerous anyway, so it's a good way just to keep it safe in the Roman areas because like people could like steal stuff and then go back across the border, and people would always be out of their jurisdiction. So you could steal from both sides and then just go across the border, and they chase you and they'd be like, oh no, across the border, off jurisdiction. So now if nobody could cross, it's safe. And they had and it was actually a really bustling part of the empire. I think they had like towns up there, and they had women, families. It was like they had towns up there. So Rome was kicking it they were there from 60 until 410. So they were there for 350 years. Rome was the boss of England. and they built Bath I think as natural hot springs, and Romans were into baths, and so they created that, and but then they called back all the legions back to Rome because Rome was getting overrun by Visigoths and Vandals and other Germanic tribes, and Rome got sacked by Visigoths in 410, so they brought back their legions to protect Rome, but by then it was too late. But they brought back the legions to try to fight against the Visigoths, who had taken over Spain and northern Africa. And so it was gone, and they were like, but they kept the culture because they were Rome. It was part of Rome. It was a Roman country, and it taught them their language, brought them their language. So they had Latin text, script, and had the Roman military formations and building construction techniques and swords and artwork and all that. But by now, I think there were some more tribes who were coming in. But then, and so that happened from 410 up until 790. So 410, 510, 610, 710. So for 380 years. So like another 380 years, about the same amount of time as Romans were there. It was post-Roman England, and so there were lots of different kingdoms. But they were more unified, I think, and more civilized than before the Romans came. I think Rome did it good for England. But then in 790 is when the Viking invasions happened, and Vikings invaded all over England. And because there was, I think there was like a warm spell in like Norway and Denmark and northern Germany and Sweden and stuff, which made a bigger population. And I think they just, and maybe it got cold again or something, so that people had to like move out, and so they basically had colonization era for the Scandinavians, just like the Romans colonized and the Greeks colonized and everything. Well, now it was the Scandinavians' turn to do it. And people from up north have more of a reason to do that anyways, because they're more subject to nature. If it's really warm for a bit, then they can live better and they can have more babies, and And then if it gets cold again, they have all these people that kind of move south. And so, yeah, they got moved south. But they were less civilized, I think, as the people down south. And so they were more like, instead of bringing like technology and culture, they'd basically just kill and take stuff. They did have some good technology. I mean, their boats, and they knew how to like make art and like weave stuff and weapons and stuff. But they were a reign of terror. They were savages. Like they would they attacked. The first place they attacked was Lindisfarne, which is this monk abbey place, because they're all Catholic by then. England, and it was in northeast England, right on the edge. This castle up on the top of a hill, right on the coast, where they could see it from miles out. And they attacked that and killed those monks pretty easily and stole all their gold and stuff and their wealth. And then continued. It was like easy fodder for them. And they had those Viking ships, which were really fast. They rowed them across the channel and then up rivers. And so they're like the ultimate vehicle. And hell, I think it was about 800 when Leif Erikson went all the way to Newfoundland and started a colony out there in Newfoundland, Canada. And that's when they found, they started Greenland, and that's when they started the country of Iceland. They discovered Iceland then. And they went into Russia, because Russia's got rivers all over, and they colonized Russia. Current day Russians are descendants of like Scandinavian Vikings. And they terrorized the French, they terrorized everybody. And I think Charlemagne maybe would have fought them because Charlemagne was coronated in 800 and they hit Lindisfarne in 790. So Charlemagne fought, and so maybe that's what his campaigns were to kind of kick out those Vikings and to consolidate Europe as one country, civilized country that could protect themselves against Vikings. But the Vikings came into England big time. And so I would think of it as, I think one of the Vikings, his name was Bloodaxe, Harold the Bloodaxe. And the legend was that he was one of the first kings of one of those English kingdoms, like York or Wessex or Essex, that started like a dynasty. But his legend was that he was a king in Norway, but he got deposed by his people, and so he took his new people out. So yeah, maybe he was like something like that happened, but it was like a colonization. So they did have ties to where they came from, to Denmark, and maybe even a lot of them it was actually under direct rule from Denmark. Like those Vikings were kind of like the pirates of the English Empire. You know, they would terrorize the Spanish and the French traders, but it was under the blessing of the Queen Elizabeth. You know, kind of like that. So that's why England is called England, because they're from the tribe, the country basically. Although, you know, Germanic, pre-Roman Germanic political system of, you know, barbarian type. But the country of the Angles, who were present day Denmark. So they brought so it was like Denmark took over England and Norway, and so the Angles from Denmark and northern Germany came to England, and so then it's called England. And also the Saxons, who were who had their own country in Germany called Saxony for a long time, and there's even like a county in Germany called Saxony. So I think it was even a country in the Holy Roman Empire, or a vassal state within the Holy Roman Empire the whole time. But the Saxons came over too. So now it was called the Anglo-Saxons, because it was the Angles and the Saxons who were like, both spoke Germanic languages, could understand each other. But they took over, so they basically took over all of England. And the people in England who were, I guess, more civilized and not as good of warriors, were getting overrun and their asses kicked one by one by those Scandinavians. And I think Bloodaxe, they were really big too. Like Bloodaxe was supposed to be a giant, but I think they called him, maybe it wasn't him, it was like Ivargar the Boneless, and they carried him around on a shield, and supposedly he didn't have any bones. Yeah, they came over and kicked all these people's asses. They got their asses kicked on one battle, though, I remember. Oh yeah, because there was one king who mounted a resistance. It was like the only kingdom from old England. I guess they would call themselves the Britons, because Roman called it Brittany. So then there were the Britons, and all the other Briton people were being taken over. But one guy was like, okay, let's consolidate all you other guys together to fight these other dudes. So, and that was Alfred the Great. And so he was kind of like civilization, the last bastion of civilization in Europe against all of these Vikings who come down and try and take you over. And so he got people together, and they kicked the Vikings' asses. And I think they started Essex and Wessex. I think Wessex is the kingdom that ended up becoming Great Britain, basically. It turned into the kingdom of Italy, or it subjugated all those other ones, then became the kingdom of England, then became the kingdom of Great Britain. So the father kingdom, if you go way back, was actually Britons, not Vikings, but it was. But the Vikings were the ones who had more of the more kingdoms, and the language took over England, their language that they brought. Yeah, so Alfred the Great kicked their asses. In one battle, they went after him, and they were beating the Vikings back, and the Vikings were running back to their ships, and one Viking stood over this one bridge where they all had to run over, and he was like this giant guy, and he would just kill everybody who came at him, and nobody could kill him. He just hacking people down until one dude like climbed under the bridge and stabbed him from like a crack under the bridge in his groin, and he fell, and they killed him. But so maybe they were just bigger too. I don't know. But so that was about in the 800s. So right after Charlemagne or during Charlemagne. So he was kind of like the English Charlemagne. And after that, England was basically, they kind of saw themselves as one group of people. They had to see themselves as one group of people to fight off the Vikings. But there were lots of kingdoms that actually were founded by Vikings, like York, the Kingdom of York, which is Northern England. It lasted a long time. It was originally called Jarvik, and that was a Viking kingdom. I think Northumbria was Viking, and I think there were some. I don't know about the Scots, like the Kingdom of Alba and the Kingdom of. I don't know if those were like native Scots. I think Scots. There were some Scots that got to stay consolidated a long time and weren't fucked with. I guess I don't know the details right now, but yeah, those kingdoms sprung up and were kicking ass and speaking English. So it was kind of like a reprogramming of language and of blood, becoming more Germanic. So now it was like a great mixture of Roman and Brittany, Roman and Germanic. And that lasted until 1066. That's when they were taken over by the French. So I guess that lasted, 850 to 1050, so like another 200 years of that or something. You had that going on, those Vikings. Yeah, and then they were taken over by France, because they had a king called, I don't know what kingdom it was. Maybe it was like Wessex, I guess. But they had this king called can't remember. Maybe it was another Alfred or something. But he or William, I don't know, but he was a king for a long time. But he I think his son tried to depose him, or he died, and then there was a dispute between his sons who was going to get the kingdom, and so but one of the sons got it, but the other son wasn't happy, so he went up to Scandinavia, because these guys were descendants of Vikings, so they kind of saw themselves as an outpost of the Vikings. Went up to Scandinavia and got this Scandinavian king, the king of Norway, to come down with his warriors, 40,000 of them or something crazy, this huge force, to help his brother depose the king of England, or whatever kingdom that was, Wessex or whatever. And they had a big battle, and they killed the Norwegian king and the brother who tried to do it. So he survived that. But at the same time, they were kind of in league with the Normans, who was a French kingdom over there in western France. And the Normans were descendants of Vikings as well, so they were all in kind of cahoots. But they were in France, and they were descendants of Vikings. But I think it was only they had been there for 200 years too. But it was only really the aristocracy who was kingdom of descendants of Vikings. But the people, they were still French, so they spoke French. They didn't speak Germanic. They spoke French. They were French. And he attacked England too right after that in 1066. William the Conqueror. He was the son of the King of France, but he was the illegitimate son. So they called him William the Bastard, but he was the only son of the guy, so he became king when he died. But he kind of he wasn't raised like as the prince or whatever, so he was like a hard ass. He was a badass. He wasn't like a spoiled brat. And he came over and attacked England because supposedly the French guy, see, they were having like wars of succession, and the French king went over to France at one point to like try to get his help, like send some troops over or loan him some money to help fight his battles in England. And supposedly he knighted him and helped him, but supposedly he like didn't let him go back to England unless he passed his kingdom when he died off to him. So supposedly that's what he did. He willed his kingdom when he died to the king of France. And so then he went back to England, the dude, and then he died and gave it to his other brother, who wasn't that popular because the other brother wanted to depose him. And he came down and got his ass kicked. But then the king of France was like, but it's mine, actually. So he attacked, and they had a battle. I think it was a pretty evenly pitched battle, but the king of England was already a little bit weakened because he had that other battle. And anyway, he ended up losing. Got killed on the battlefield, and the French dude won. But the French dude came over with French people. His warriors were French. They looked different too. They shaved their heads, so they had a really shaved the back of their heads. They had a really weird, and they were, I think, more Catholic. And they just had different customs. It was kind of like Rome coming over again. They had bigger palaces. They didn't have like small like huts, where they would eat their meat with their hands and stuff. They were more Romanized, and so they came over, and I think he was king for like 11 years, from 1066 to 1077 or something. But he came over, and he took over England and basically gave all of his warriors land in England. That was kind of his payment to them for fighting for him. So they basically took over England and murdered and subjugated the locals and spoke French. And so for 300 years, all the rich people and aristocracy, the landed classes, the people with land, who got set around and got taxes from the locals, spoke a different language. And the kings and princes spoke French. And so for 300 years, England became franchised. And then, so back after that, let's see, that was in 10. So then fast forward up to like 1450, 1500. That's kind of when it all melded together again, and it became a new language, current day English. Kind of like pre-Shakespeare, because Shakespeare was about 1650, so. 1550. Shakespeare was like 1580. So, so that's where English came from. But that's why we have all of our popular English words, or more complex English words, are from France. Like poultry is food that comes from chicken, but it's not the chicken. Well, that comes from French. Like pollo is chicken in France. But chicken is actually a Germanic word, because the poor people were the ones who had to play with the animal and twist its head and kill it and cut it up. Veal, well, vaca from cow, that comes from French because it's cooked and done. But cow is the Germanic word. So, so then, so William the Conqueror, but he was actually kind of like, that was like another renaissance for England, because he brought the customs of France over. And when he came over, he took inventory to find out like he was kind of like a renovation of England. He took inventory to find out like how many cows and how many people and everything, census and all that. And he did it like with a fine-tooth comb, and of like all of England. I don't know how much it was his, but there was kind of like the unification of all of England, because he took over some of the other kingdoms too. I think he'd fight a lot, and but when he took over England, he kept his kingdom in France too. But he was in England, so now it was the England of like England, the kingdom of England and France. So it was basically the biggest country in Europe at the time, from like the late 1000s and 1100s. And so he had a son, and then his son had a son, who was this other dude, King Henry II, I think his name was. And he was a big time king. Oh, actually, William the Conqueror, he fought a lot too. He died fighting a campaign in France, I guess fighting like rebellious lords or something. And he got kicked off his horse, and he was like an old dude by then, I guess. And he died because his horse kicked him off because there was like, got scared from like a timber that fell in front of him. And as he was laying on his deathbed, he told the friar there that he basically took over England and he tortured a lot of people, and he was going to go to hell for it. And he refused to give it, to name an heir. I don't think he had any kids. So all of his friends were like pissed off at him, so they just like stripped him naked and just left him in the church and didn't even bury him. Just left his body there. And went back to England. I think there was like a little bit of civil war or whatever, but his son ended up becoming king. And then so his son's son, his grandson, it was like 100 years later, in like 1150-ish. I think it's Henry II. And he was a big time king because he was like really badass. He'd ride his horse all over England, like keeping in touch with all the warlords and fighting wars if anybody, went against him, and consolidated the kingdom. And he married a French princess from Aquitaine, which I guess was like southern France. It was one of the provinces of their kingdom, their empire. It was called the Angevin Empire. Eleanor of Aquitaine, and she was like a big time leader too, because she was really cultured, and she was older than Henry, but they actually got along and they liked each other. And Henry was, but Henry had England was because they were descendants of French. They spoke French. Eleanor of Aquitaine and King Henry, they spoke French. And they were Catholic, so they had like the Catholic bishop who was there, the Catholic cardinal who was, vassal to Rome. And he wanted to take a little bit of power back from Rome. Like, I don't know exactly what the argument was, but they had some disagreements about stuff. And he ended up having the guy killed inside of a church. And, which pissed off a lot of people, because that was like sacrilege to do that. Even though he was a popular king and stuff, it pissed off a lot of people. And he was kind of getting older, but he got deposed by his son. His son basically came up to him and was like, "I'm going to depose you, Daddy." And he's like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, I got signatures of all the other lords. They're on my side, so you better not fight." And he's like, "What? Let me see the list." So he looked at the list of all the people who wanted to depose him, and his other son was the first on it. Who was, I guess the son that he liked, the younger brother. And the son who deposed him was Richard the Lionheart. And so he was like, oh. So he got depressed, and he died 2 days later of like depression. So then Richard the Lionheart was like king, but he was only in England for 2 weeks, because that's when the Pope decided to do the Crusades and send a bunch of like kings and stuff to the Middle East to try to take the Middle East back. So Richard the Lionheart went off to the Middle East to do the Crusades, and he had like battles. He won battles and stuff in the Middle East. And Robin Hood was one of the soldiers in his battle, in his army. And so King John, his little brother, was like the vassal king. He was the regent king of England while Richard was gone. And Richard was there, I don't know how many years, but then he came back. And he was sieging like a French town on his way back, maybe like a rebellious French town or something, because they still had the Angevin Empire. And he was standing, he got out, because I guess he survived the Crusades, so he thought he was all badass. So he's standing in front of in front of the castle, like, "You better surrender, you bastards," in his armor. But one of the archers was a really good aim and shot him and got him right in the neck where he wasn't armored and killed him after it got infected a couple days later. So he never made it back to England. And so then his brother John became king. But John, I guess maybe the lords didn't like him as much, or they didn't see him as like the real king or whatever. But he was an asshole. He was a bad king. That's why they call him Bad King John. And so he would like take people's land from him, like the aristocracy. Like his father, King Henry II, was a really good king. He was very cultured. He wanted to spread religion and literacy and all that kind of stuff. And he respected his lords and stuff, and he was a good king. But his son was like taking land away from lords and killing lords, like basically imprisoning them and torturing them and killing them and taking their land and being an asshole. And so people, they like rebelled against him. And also that's when Robin Hood lived. Robin Hood was rebelling against him too. So they came up with the Magna Carta. They came up with this big document that limited the king's power and said that the king couldn't do that to those people. So they invented the Parliament. It was where all the lords could sit with the king, and the king couldn't make a new law unless they agreed. So it was kind of like the beginning. It was like the 1100s, late 1100s. The king couldn't do anything. It was like a constitutional monarchy at that point, which was pretty advanced for the time. And then he died, and then who took over after that? I think it was like his son. And there's some dude named Richard Longshanks, Edward Longshanks. I think he was part of the same dynasty. I'm getting a little bit fuzzy on my history, but he was a bad king. He fought against the Scots, killed the Scots, and so this is like in the 1200s. He made the Scots rebel against him, and so that's where Braveheart comes from. William Wallace fought against William Longshanks. But Longshanks was a big time like king. He was powerful. Angevin Empire was powerful at that point. So he was rich. He was buried. They found his body and they looked at his body, and he was buried in like purple king outfit and all that stuff. And he's called Longshanks because he was tall. I guess shanks means legs, long legs or something. And they measured him at 6'2", so I guess 6'2" was really tall in those days. Which, like, well, how tall would that be these days? The average dude was probably like 5'6". So if the average dude's 5'10" now, he would have been like 8 inches taller, like 6'6". So, yeah. So he was a baddie. He fought a lot of people, and then so I think he was pretty much the guy who lost. That was the time of wasn't that about the time of Joan of Arc? Because she was the one who inspired. I'm gonna do another video because I'm running out of time.